All right, I see most of you are here, so I will start. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this webinar on the UPR process of the Philippines. My name is Victor Druk. I am a policy and campaign officer at Viva Salud, which is a Belgian NGO focusing on the right to health in the DRC, Palestine, and of course, the Philippines. So we were holding this webinar on the UPR process of the Philippines, which they were subjected to in November of 2022 by the United Nations Human Rights Council. So for those who don't know, it is a unique process which involves the review of the human rights records of all 193 member states. It is a state-driven process under the auspices of the Human Rights Council, which provides the opportunity for each state to declare what actions they have taken to improve their human rights situations in their countries and fulfill their human rights obligations. So we are here today to tell you something more about this process, but also looking forward, what are the challenges, what are the opportunities for the human rights in the Philippines. And with us today are Cristina Palabay. She is the Secretary General of the Karapatan Alliance of the Philippines, a human rights organization. We have Kat Berza. She is a Director for Advocacy, Public Information and Research Department of the Council for Health and Development in the Philippines. And last but not least, we have Claire Chastain with us. She's the project manager at the Catalan Association for Peace. So I will give the floor now to Cristina Palabay, who will tell you something more about the UPR process. The floor is yours.
Okay. I can share my screen, if that's all right. Hello, everyone. So I'm sharing this screen. Well, the UPR is in its fourth cycle right now on its review. The Philippines usually fall on the first few countries in the cycles for review. So it basically means that it's a peer review process by states in accordance to the compliance to various conventions and treaties, whether these are ratified or signed by the Philippine government or not. The various states will be able to provide views and recommendations in relation to the reports that they have accepted or they have received during the period of review. In the case of the Philippines, there were several stakeholders who provided submissions, and this includes the network that Karapatan is convening, the Philippine UPR Watch. There is the whole network submitted at least 22 out of the more than 40 civil society submissions in relation to the UPR on the Philippines. So there's quite a robust participation among civil society organizations. The key messages, when we were there in November, we witnessed, we heard several key messages by government, and this includes the buzzwords nowadays of the Philippine government: real justice, real time. The head of delegation of the Philippine government said that there's no culture of impunity in the Philippines. There is what is called the transformational reform of the Philippine justice system. Justice Secretary Remulla said that they are injecting human rights into the DNA of all processes of law enforcement and delivery of justice. Big words, but at the same time, we should look at the context. The context being what we have seen and what we are seeing in terms of the situation that we are in on the ground. In terms of extrajudicial killings were during the period under review, period of review from 2017 to 2022. What we saw was a deluge of reports of extrajudicial killings, especially during the time of former President Duterte. Thousands. One report of government, an official government document said, and it came from the government itself, by December 2017, it has logged in at least 20,000 deaths in the course of its implementation of the drug war. This is outside of the documented cases of extrajudicial killings committed by alleged state forces in the course of the counterinsurgency program. Under Marcos, during the past 6 months or in the first 5 months of the Marcos administration, the Third World Study Center has monitored at least 127 deaths in the drug war, while Karapatan has documented at least 10 who were killed in the counterinsurgency program. Of course, this has ballooned now, as of January to at least 200 according to the Third World Study Center, and we have documented at least 15 into the new year. In the past, how many months already? 6 months of the Marcos Jr. administration. When Justice Secretary Remulla said that there's real justice in real time in the Philippines, I guess many people would laugh at it, because justice is the most evasive concept and reality that we are into right now. For example, in the drug war, we monitored that there is zero final conviction. I repeat, zero final convictions in the thousands of cases that were documented of extrajudicial killings in the drug war. Why do we say that there are zero final convictions? There are 2 known cases that some perpetrators, particularly policemen, were convicted. But these 2 cases out of thousands, have yet to attain finality, because these are still under appeal, even if they have been convicted by the lower courts. At the same time, there were dismissals, yes. There were administrative sanctions, yes. Demotions, transfer to other posts among the police who were known to have committed these killings. But in terms of being penalized under the law, there is no known case yet. And even the government admits this. Among the cases of killings, disappearances, torture of activists and civilians, only 3% of the cases being handled by the task force, sorry, that's not 3%, 13% of the cases being handled by the task force on AO35 have achieved conviction. And this includes the cases of the perpetrators in the Maguindanao massacre. There are at least nearly 400 cases being handled by this task force, but there is very little, it has very little to show in terms of conviction. Many are under investigation, but many have been also considered as cold cases. I've mentioned this to the Special Rapporteur on extrajudicial killings when he recently had this unofficial visit here in the Philippines. The problem is the task force, the body that's being tasked to look into these killings, have a credibility problem. No, in the first place, this task force is composed not only of the Justice Department but also of the police and the military. No, so there is when the perpetrators are among the police and the military, and you have a body investigate, they're literally investigating themselves. No, so how can there be genuine belief and credibility on the independence of this body? We also attest to the continuing suppression of civil and political rights, no, including the freedom of association and peaceful assembly, freedom of expression, and the rights against arbitrary arrests and detention, threats and intimidation. All of these previous violations being conducted during the time of the Duterte administration, these are still continuing, and I dare say that these violations are consistently on the rise, because there is no one that has been held accountable. No, I mean, there are lots of cases, for example, lodged against members or officers of the National Task Force to End Local Communist Armed Conflict, but these cases are not moving. No, they have gathered dust, in the in the complaint mechanism, such as the ombudsman, and in some courts. In short, no one has been made accountable, even for the crimes of threats or red tagging. Much more so in the cases of violations on international humanitarian law, such as the forced or fake surrender, militarization in urban and rural communities, etc. The weaponization of the legal system continue, with the use of terror laws, the laws on cyber libel and libel laws, the filing of trumped-up charges. While of course we were acquitted, in a certain case, a perjury case, this January, but it took us 3 years. It took us so many things, to overcome 3 years of being subjected to such harassment, judicial harassment in court, and as well as dangers to our security and liberty. So what we tracked in the past UPR is that there are many recommendations of states on civil and political rights. This includes an overwhelming number of recommendations. I think half or nearly half of the recommendations pertain to civil and political rights. But the accepted recommendations are very few. We have received a draft of the recommendations accepted or noted or still under consideration, by the Philippine government. They still have to report before the Human Rights Council this coming March. But so far, there are many pending responses on issues pertaining to civil and political rights, and this includes calls or recommendations by numerous governments, such as the government of Belgium or the United Kingdom, in terms of protection of human rights defenders, and the recommendation, for example, of the United States government to put an end to red tagging. All these were put like were put aside, so to speak, set aside by the Philippine government as under consideration. But there is talk that they will not accept these recommendations, especially pertaining to the exercise of freedom of association, red tagging, and human rights and protection of human rights defenders. So there are various themes of these recommendations made by various states on death penalty, on most of the recommendations on the death penalty were accepted by the Philippine government, while the recommendation for the ratification of the International Convention on Enforced Disappearances, they keep on rejecting this recommendation. They say that there's a local domestic law on enforced disappearance, and they don't need to ratify the International Convention on Enforced Disappearance. But that just makes it quite incongruent. Why not? I think the bigger question is why not. There are also several recommendations on the ICC and on the Rome Statute, and these are all considered or held at bay by the Philippine government. I guess the current stance of the government on the ICC investigation plays a big role. Spells a lot of things in terms of its acceptance of recommendations on the Rome Statute and the ICC. The government also accepted recommendations on the National Preventive Mechanism Against Torture, but the question is about implementation. As I said, there are many states who called for justice and accountability in relation to the extrajudicial killings in the drug war and on human rights-based approach in the government campaign against illegal drugs. Many states also made recommendations on human rights defenders, protection of human rights defenders, and for the enactment of the Human Rights Defenders Protection Law. There were also several recommendations on press freedom, freedom of expression, red tagging, and terror laws. Maybe I should put a little more emphasis on the recent implications of the terror law, considering that one of the recent moves of the Anti-Terrorism Council was to designate a former colleague of ours, Dr. Nati Castro, a doctor, a community-based doctor who was also our former coordinator in Caraga. She was arrested last year. She was released because the case, there was a remedy employed by her lawyer. But her recent designation is a concern because it literally still puts the targets on Nati's back, and as well as the numerous organizations mentioned, including Karapatan, among her affiliations. The thing with designation is, as we have already stated many times, is it is very arbitrary, and erroneous even, because there's no due process. Nati didn't, as far as we know, Nati didn't receive any opportunity, to have a look at the evidence against her. There is actually no cited evidence. There are only testimony, so and so, but nothing that can stand as credible and admissible before local courts, or I think in any court. That's why they resorted to the process of designation. It is only the Anti-Terrorism Council that designated her, and they say that the immediate impact would be the freezing of her assets, as well as the assets of those related to her. But that by itself is, there's several violations to that action of the Anti-Terrorism Council. Not only the violation on Nati's right to due process. We think that Nati's case is a precursor to more instances of violations using the anti-terrorism law. There were several issues missed by several states during the last UPR. There were scarcely any, there's no mention or recognition that there are political prisoners, and the need to to uphold their rights. But in reality, the number of political prisoners have risen to more than 800 already in the country, considering the pattern of judicial harassment, filing of trumped-up charges, use of laws or weaponization of laws against human rights defenders and many civilians. the issue of internally displaced persons, was also missed by several states in their recommendations, considering that we still have a problem with the IDPs in Marawi, and in many places right now where communities are being displaced, residents of communities are being displaced because of the bombings being conducted by the armed forces of the Philippines. There are also some missed points on the attacks against women and LGBTQ defenders. The government was big on saying that, okay, we are accepting recommendations in relation to violence against women and children, but they're very adamantly they are adamantly resisting any recommendation on the enactment of the law on the protection, on the recognition of sexual orientation and gender identity and expression law. And we think that this lack of recognition shows that there exists not only discrimination, but there is a very pervasive pattern of sexism among government and state actors. Academic freedom issues were also missed, in terms of recently a professor of mine, a former professor of mine, was arrested. You know why? Because of alleged non-payment of Social Security. What's this? Social Security dues, for a member of her household, but those allegations were not true at all. So means that there are constant attempts to infringe on academic freedom in various ways through the censorship of books. They are able now to say that this book should not be read, this book should be thrown out of libraries. They are red tagging even bookshops. They are trying to prevent printing of books which they deem are subversive. And which brings us to what now? The issue of what should we look at going forward. We think, and this we mentioned this to the special rapporteur on extrajudicial killings. I think that was last week, that with all these things happening, especially with the ICC investigation, the pre-trial chamber deciding to go forward with the investigation, though it's under appeal right now by the Philippine government, with the recent positive recommendations by the high-level tripartite mission of the International Labor Organization. They recently had the mission here. We think that it's really said that a joint program is a joint program. It's on technical cooperation, but technical cooperation barely solves the issue of accountability, of justice, and that is I think one of the main things that we should go forward with, a push towards independent investigation on the situation in the Philippines. In relation to these efforts at the Human Rights Council, of course, the greater challenge and I think the more exciting one is to really forge a stronger solidarity, international solidarity among numerous groups and communities all over the world who are suffering the same situation or plight that we are looking at right now in the Philippines. So I'll end with my discussion there, and I'll be open to questions after my fellow panelists have spoken. Thank you.
Thank you, Cristina. I will now give the floor to Kat Berza of CHD. Go ahead.
Thank you, Victor. Let me share my slides. All right. Good morning and good evening. My name is Kat Berza, Director of Advocacy, Public Information and Research Department of the Council for Health and Development Philippines. 3 months after the 4th cycle of the United Nations Universal Periodic Review of the Republic of the Philippines in Geneva, Switzerland last November 14, 2022, we continue to seek immediate, substantial, and essential reforms to heal our ailing public health system. My presentation is derived from our recent publication, authored with the Coalition for People's Right to Health and other organizations, titled Health is Our Human Right. Couldn't be more appropriate than this. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights recognize the right to a standard of living adequate for health and well-being. The Vienna Declaration and Program of Action declared that the human rights and fundamental freedoms are the birthright of all human beings. Their protection and promotion is first the responsibility of governments. In the Philippines, the 1987 Constitution includes pertinent constitutional provisions relating to the right to health. The fragmented and weak health system in the Philippines is in a critical situation. In the alternative report submitted to the 4th cycle of the UPR, covering the period under review from 2017 to March 2022, the Duterte administration furthered the implementation of policies that significantly lessened government's responsibility for public health and resulted in starker inequities. The national health budget for 2017 to 2022, despite showing nominally increasing trends for personal services, maintenance, and other operating expenses, national health insurance program budgets reveal an overall stagnation in capital outlay from 27.56 billion pesos in 2017 to 26.96 billion for 2022, with significant cuts made in 2019 up to 2021. This aspect of the allocation is necessary for the much-needed expansion of infrastructure and equipment to match the still unmet public health demands, notwithstanding public health emergencies like COVID-19. Without sound fiscal measures to strengthen the public health system, public hospitals are forced to generate income to support their operations, while non-government actors become increasingly involved in the financing and the provision of healthcare services. This paves the way for further privatization of health, consistent with the dominant neoliberal policies on a global scale. Private hospitals in the Philippines continue to outnumber public hospitals. In 2016, from a total of 1,224 licensed hospitals throughout the country, 434 or 35% were government-owned, and 790 or 64.5% were private. But as of December 31, 2020, despite an increase to 1,283 or 4.82% in the number of licensed hospitals, government-owned hospitals were reduced to 428 or 33%, while privately owned hospitals increased to 855 or 66%. Given the higher costs and amount of out-of-pocket spending in private hospitals, the clear majority of such facilities belies the state commitment to make health services available and accessible to the public. Amid these conditions of health services, official government data shows that 4 out of 10 deaths in the Philippines were not medically attended, and more than half, or 56.4%, of the recorded deaths occurred at home. Meanwhile, health workers continue to suffer immeasurable injustice despite their role in the health system. According to the Department of Health, there are almost 1.8 million healthcare workers in the Philippines, 60 to 70% of whom are nurses, followed by midwives at 10% and physicians at 9%. Every year, health science colleges graduate 38,000 nurses and 4,500 doctors. Although there are 144,360 registered doctors in the country, there are only 10,482 doctors in public health, and 5,484 are working in rural health units. The Department of Health reports that from 40,775 practicing doctors in 2017, this decreased to 28,800 by October 31, 2021. According to the Department of Health 2020 annual report, the ratio of government physician to population is 1 per 32,460 Filipinos. This is a far cry from the World Health Organization recommendation of 1 physician per 1,000 population. The serious decline in the health workforce of the country, due mainly to overseas migration, may be traced to the severely inadequate compensation and benefits, poor working conditions, deprivation of rights, and lack of protection for these frontliners. Temporary or contractual hiring is widespread in the health sector in both public and private facilities, which deprive many healthcare workers of the rights and benefits of regular employees. All the above factors, however, are not the only ones influencing the lack of doctors and other health workers in the country, especially in the rural areas where they are needed most. Healthcare workers have not been spared from intensified human rights violations and political repression under the administration of President Duterte. Doctors and healthcare personnel working in both public service and private voluntary organizations have been targeted by uniformed personnel and paramilitary forces. Healthcare workers have been subjected to harassment, intimidation, terrorist labeling, false accusation, abduction, unlawful arrest, illegal detention, and extrajudicial killings. The vilification and repression during the time of the COVID-19 pandemic have also placed healthcare workers in a more difficult situation. The global COVID-19 pandemic brought about by major societal changes, given its enormous implications on public health, economics, and culture. However, in countries wherein weaknesses and outright neglect of health systems had been made evident, this public health emergency also caused increasing reliance on emergency powers. As allowed with conditions by the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, which was ratified by the Philippines on October 23, 1986, and enforced on January 23, 1987. From lockdowns to curfews, policies generated in the name of mitigating the spread of the virus in the Philippines were allegedly temporary, yet at the same time became far-reaching in scope. Given the nature of stringent controls and guidelines that relied on state security forces much more than health workers, as in the previous drug and counterinsurgency operations, potential human rights violations are a grave concern. Although the Philippine government is reported to have accepted several recommendations from UN member states made during the 4th cycle of the UPR last year, such as these were the health-specific recommendations made by the UN member states. Number 1, enhancement of programs on universal access to healthcare, including support services on mental health and well-being. Number 2, drinking water and sanitation coverage in rural areas. 3, reduction of maternal mortality. Promotion and protection of rights of persons with disability. and promotion of initiatives to improve in the provision of prenatal and postnatal care for pregnant and breastfeeding women in detention centers. Although the accepted recommendations are important, we must never forget that the duty to respect, protect, fulfill, and guarantee the right to health will be meaningless without the state's commitment and clear identification of concrete, immediate, and decisive steps that need to be taken in order to address the country's fundamental health and human rights. So in view of the gross violations of the right to health that the Philippine government has committed against the people and healthcare workers, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic, we reiterate the following recommendations. Number one, immediately increase the health budget, focusing on health infrastructure, human resources, and service delivery to build a comprehensive and progressive national public health system. We call on the government to enact House Bill 208 or the Free National Public Health System Act. Two, systematically address and reverse the privatization and devolution of essential health services, which hampers public access to these services. Three, improve and empower community-based health programs across the country to strengthen primary care and mental health services. Four, address injustices and inequities in COVID-19 pandemic, such as housing, access to water, food security, security of tenure and benefits, occupational and school health, among others. Five, ensure access to COVID-19 diagnostics, therapeutics, technologies, and vaccines, both locally and globally, through a patent waiver, national industrialization, and robust public health institutions. Six, ensure safety, protection, and welfare of healthcare workers at all times, especially during the pandemic. Enforce 8-hour duty based on International Labor Organization standard on working time. End the system of contractual and temporary employment, violation of the rights to unionize, and redress of grievances among healthcare workers. 8, stop the labor export policy. Review, reform existing laws on salaries, wages, and benefits to provide just compensation, job security, humane working conditions, and professional growth to promote and uphold the interest and welfare of healthcare workers. 9, address the crisis in the health workforce. There must be a clear health human resource development plan based on the health needs of the Filipino people. And last but not the least, end impunity. Investigate and ensure accountability for human rights violations against doctors and other healthcare workers. Prosecute perpetrators, execute the pertinent judicial processes to ensure that justice prevails. Now, the full reports and recommendations can be downloaded here. You may scan or follow the links posted here. Thank you, and we look forward to a stronger cooperation and solidarity to reclaim our right to health and assert for a health system that is truly compassionate, just, and people-centered. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you very much, Kat, for this nice presentation. I will now give the floor to Claire Chastain of the ACPAU, the Catalan Association for Peace.
Thank you, Victor. Hello, everyone. I'm very happy to be a part of this webinar today, and I wanted to thank my fellow co-organizers and all the participants, because I'm seeing that we have a lot of public today, so that's wonderful. Since I'm the third intern, many very interesting things have been said and precise inputs have been given by my two colleagues. So I think I will focus on the work that we do as a Catalan NGO to raise awareness on the UPR process and beyond on the human rights violations and on the situation in the Philippines. Let me maybe first introduce briefly myself and give you a little background on the association on which behalf I'm speaking today. So my name is Claire, and I work as a project manager and coordinating the work on the Philippines for the ACP, the Catalan Association for Peace. It's a Barcelona-based association that was founded in 1990, and we work for the respect of all human rights everywhere and everyone. Actually, that's our slogan. So we're a small association, but with a global perspective. And I want to raise the fact that maybe the main feature of our way of doing things is that we never decide from Barcelona, from Western or Southern Europe, what to do in or with any of the countries we are developing projects with. We always rely on what our partners say and need and ask. That's our way of doing things. It has been the case since the very beginning of our existence, and it's the case with the Philippines, because we want to bring a different perspective of solidarity work and of conceiving not international relations, because we're not a nation, but I would say intersocial relations, because I think we are all social actors of the world. We are trying to work according to a much more multilateral scheme among all the social actors and try to make a difference. As Tina said in the beginning of her presentation, more than 40 submissions from the civil society to the UPR. That's what I'm talking about. We can make a difference, sorry. So in that sense, we count more than 30 years, the ICP of experience in international solidarity and cooperation. And more recently, over the past years, 10 years, we've been working also on education, sensibilization of the Catalan and the Spanish society to human rights violations, to the relationships between armed conflicts, social conflicts, the human rights violations, and peace building. And we want to do that through human rights, through justice, accountability, because without the full respect of human rights, there can be no justice. And without justice, there can be no peace. So we work through education and sensibilization campaigns, and also cultural action. I want to raise this point because we realized, mainly during the pandemics, that culture and art, it's a global good, it's a human good, and it's a very effective way to resist. We can see it in Palestine, in Kurdistan, and it's also the case in the Philippines. And just to give you an example, we are organizing karaokes, which are very powerful activity to do here with the community. We do trainings, and obviously we also do political advocacy. At present time, we work in 15 countries with 4 priority countries. It doesn't mean they are more important. It's only because we want to put more resources, human and financial. And one of these 4 countries is the Philippines. Why am I saying all this? Because I think we are quite representative of what a European small association can be, but probably with a stronger political stance than others in the peace movement. It's our identity, and it's a political decision to do so. As was the fact that we started working on the Philippines, it was the result of a clear political decision and a clear bet. Why did we do this? Because of several factors. One of them, I would say, is the long experience that we have in Colombia, more than 20 years working on the ground and at international level to help the peace process in Colombia. And we drew a parallel. We saw that there are many similarities with the Philippines. And the other factor that brought us to work on the Philippines is that nobody does, almost nobody does. I really can say that we are amongst the very, very few organizations, and I think one of the, maybe the only organization in Catalonia working on the Philippines, despite the fact that you would expect something else from the human rights sector in Spain because of the colonial history, the very strong ties there should be. But we realized immediately when we first started to work on the Philippines, it was about 3.5 years ago, actually, when Tina came to visit us in Barcelona, and we started to establish strong links and relationships with Karapatan. Well, we became aware very, very quickly that nobody had a clue Nobody knew about the very dire situation regarding the human rights defenders, and the ongoing conflicts in the Philippines. Besides tourism in paradise beach resorts and sporadically natural disasters, the Philippines was completely off the map. So we decided to put it on the human rights and the global justice map. I'm telling you this because I think it's important to give you the context in which we work here, and I think it's the case in many other European, Southern European and Western European countries, because it obviously makes it more difficult to get into detail, to explain a very complex process as the UPR, when on top of it, it's on a country that is not automatically related to human rights violations. So to be able to mobilize on the UPR process in the Philippines, we had to, and we still have to act on a very basic level and give the basics of the situation, the actual situation, the history of the Philippines. And we do that while simultaneously in different areas and using different tools. For example, every time we think we can have a little attention on a specific situation, we publish on our social media. For example, when the new government was elected a few months ago, when Marcos Jr. did the first speech at the UN as a president of the Philippines, every time there is one of the cases Tina was talking about under the anti-terror law that is being used to persecute human rights defenders. Of course, on the ICC investigation against Duterte and on the UPR process. But to be able to get people's attention and the media's attention, we also have to do a very basic ongoing work. We have trainings on the Philippines. We systematically advocate at the Catalan and the Spanish level. We obtained resolutions on both levels over the past 2 years, at the Catalan parliament and the Spanish parliament. And we try to do a follow-up of those resolutions, and we are preparing another one when the process of the UPR ends in a few weeks. And also at the EU level, we worked very closely with Karapatan and other partners to push for the adoption of the resolution that was passed last year by the EU Parliament. And actually, I'm happy to say that it was mainly thanks to our Spanish and Catalan MPs who reacted very positively to our demands and presented the proposal. And this is also something that we monitor and we do a follow-up as much as we can. We started to work here with the community in Barcelona. It's quite numerous, and we try to work through cultural and social projects on the women, for example, on the migrants, and also to try to give another narrative of the history of the country, their country of origin, theirs or their parents or grandparents. We also participate last year in the IOM, the International Observation Mission of the electoral process with ICHRP. We did not go to the Philippines because it was still not possible to travel, but we acted as an international commissioner. So basically to advocate and to give all the information that were arriving from the ground, to spread it here to the institutions, to the associations, to everyone, to the public, general public. And also we invite every time we can, human rights defenders from the Philippines or based in Europe, to advocate, to raise awareness. And we try to work together with universities, because we think that sensibilizing the youth here, the students, is very important. And last point I want to raise, we are developing together with another Catalan association, one of our main partners, International Action for Peace. We're developing international protection mechanisms for human rights defenders. We already do that. They've been doing it. International Action for Peace, IAP, has been doing it for more than 10 years in Colombia. And we're trying to see how we could create a mechanism, maybe not on the ground, but at international level, for the human rights defenders in the Philippines, because obviously, it's one of the worst countries regarding the security and the protection for the human rights defenders. And as Tinai was saying, it's part of the recommendations that the Filipino government puts aside, and they don't want to see that. But this is why we need to work more on this particular aspect. I think we are making progress. It's still the beginning, but we are making progress because we are tirelessly making noise about the Philippines. So as I was saying in the beginning, to get attention on a very complex and specific process as the UPR, we must give a context to it, because it's a double challenge, a complex process and a quite unknown country, despite the very dramatic situation. What do we do? Well, we try to, for example, talk about the fact that the government is run by the late dictator's son. That is something people can relate to. We talk about the ICC investigation, because actually it's the only country in Asia that is under an investigation, well, Duterte, the ex-president, for crimes against humanity. It's the worst crime, the worst possible crime. So we try to give people hints to get them have a sense of the gravity of the situation. If you allow me, Victor, if you could share the link of the website that we created, well, together with you and with Karapatan, we gathered all the work we've been doing over the past 3 years to create a website, which is called Human Rights in the Philippines. I think it can be useful. It's in 3 languages, Catalan, Spanish, and English. And actually the last report, we have every 4 months, 3 or 4 months, a report, because it's a website. Good thing is that it's a tool and we can update it. The last report that should be published today or tomorrow is precisely on the UPR. You'll see it's a very basic report, but it's already something that can help convey the message. And let me say that it was elaborated together with the Autonomous University of Barcelona. So it's an interesting collaboration that we have. And I will just end saying that every time we can, every time we have the opportunity to, we ask the Catalan and mainly also the Spanish authorities, because it's state with at state level, to intervene whenever it's possible, bilaterally or multilaterally, either at the EU or the UN. Every time they can, ask the Filipino government to raise the issue of the human rights and the human rights violation and the need to respect the international standard they actually ratified. Also at the EU level, there is a very interesting also process that I think Tinai didn't speak about this, about the GSP+. It's a mechanism, a commercial trade preference mechanism that the Filipino government beneficiates from it. But of course, the GSP Plus should be reconducted in a few weeks or months. But if there is no respect of the human rights, there should be no reconduction of the GSP Plus mechanism, privileged mechanism for trade. So we try to also advocate on that. And at the UN level, we ask the Spanish government to, well, first of all, vote in favor of the reports, of the recommendations regarding the Philippines, to insist and to push for the visits on the ground of the special rapporteurs. This UPR session, the Spanish government were not part of the actual council, but the previous time they were, and we tried to really have a strong action before the session. It was, I think, in June 2020, and we obtained a favorable vote of the Spanish government. One thing that the Spanish government has been doing on this last UPR session, they have recommendations, very general recommendations on the technical assistance and cooperation. But as Tinai said, it's not enough. We need them to recognize the culture of impunity and to push for justice. And we would like to have a judicial cooperation and not only a technical cooperation. The Spanish government also focuses on the death penalty, extrajudicial killings, the need to ratify the International Convention of Enforced Disappearances, and the human rights defenders. So those are pretty good recommendations, and we will, of course, keep monitoring them. Also, we asked the Spanish government to support the ICC investigation and to push for any independent investigation that could be carried on in the Philippines. It's interesting to notice, I was in a webinar a few days ago on geopolitical topics, and it was raised and that Asia is getting more and more important everywhere at global scale because it's strategic. It's a strategic bet for the EU, for the US, for Russia, and actually many countries that have no specific relationship or logical relationship with Asia are elaborating strategies. And I asked a question about the Philippines, and they recognized that the Philippines was a very important country because of the China and the conflict over the seas, because it's commercially relevant. A lot of energy supply go through, I think it's 2/3 of the global energy supply going through the Malacca and by the Filipinos coast. So I said, I think it's very interesting that you develop strategies for Asia, but because it's commercially relevant, what about the human rights? So we really think, and we ask also the Spanish government to do so, we need to put the human rights in the center. And as Tina said before, we need to keep building all together a global social movement of solidarity. And as ACP, that's our commitment, and we will keep making noise about this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Claire. Before we move to the questions, I would like to firstly express my gratitude to the organizers of this event, IBON Europe, ICHRP-Europe, Karapatan, Viva Salud, ACPAU, and the Council for Health and Development. And I would also like to thank the three of you, our three wonderful speakers. Thank you very much for this very interesting conversation about the UPR process and human rights in the Philippines. So I suggest that now we move to the part where you answer questions. So I saw that the first question came from Otto de Vries about the assessment of the recent held International Labour Organization high-level tripartite mission in the Philippines in relation with the UPR of the UN. Tinay, could you answer that question?
Perhaps Kat can make a go for it first, since it also involved first and foremost health workers, no? Especially those in the health workers. So Kat, can you go first?
Right. Thank you, Tina and Victor. It was true that when the high-level tripartite mission of the International Labour Organization went here in the Philippines, our organizations, together with the health workers that we are organizing and are members of the Philippine movement here, we engaged with the ILO HLTM. This is because we recognize the role of the ILO and the role of the civil society organizations and trade unions in voicing out our serious concerns about the salaries and most especially the work conditions of health workers here in the Philippines. Health workers here, it is normal for nurses, for example, to just get 12,000 pesos. There are still nurses that get 12,000 pesos or roughly 200 euros per month here, no? So that is a big issue in terms of salary. And aside from salary, there is also a big issue on the working hours. Health workers here work as long as 12 hours per shift, no? Instead of the the rightful 8 hours per shift. And contractualization is still very prevalent among the health sector. So with the engagement of Council for Health and Development together with the Alliance of Health Workers in the ILO, although we recognize that platform to voice out our concerns regarding the conditions and the precarious work of our health workers here, we coincided that with manifestations or mobilizations in the streets while the ILO meeting was ongoing. And we plan on continuing that kind of engagement in the different avenues that we can seek or have in the United Nations, ILO, and other international communities. So yeah, back to you, Tinay.
Yeah, this is the second mission of this is the second high-level mission by the International Labor Organization in the Philippines for the past 2 decades. I think the first was in 2009, and it's a high-level mission by the ILO itself. This one is the one that was held in January was a tripartite mission, spurred by the Committee of Standards in relation to the complaints on the violations on the rights to freedom of association and the right to organize. The thing with the missions are really a way of putting it out there, the situation here. But in terms of the recommendations, when I looked at the recommendations in 2009, these are the very same recommendations that are still being pushed in the January 2023 mission. And it's sad to say that almost all, if not all, of the recommendations have yet to be implemented or even recognized by the Philippine government. So I guess the challenge is how do government walk the talk? I mean, you cannot just accept a mission and then there's a report out there by international bodies and not do anything about it. So there should be pressure exerted to really demand action from the Philippine government. We're fairly sure that the tripartite mission will render important recommendations, because the realities are really in terms of the situation of workers, both in the private and public sector. It's not rocket science, as they say. It's fairly apparent. When they heard the various testimonies, especially of the victims, the survivors. So the challenge is to really make these things work. And if not, I'd like to address immediately I think there was a question on resolution on the independent investigation. To this day, no state has signified at the UN Human Rights Council that it is interested in pursuing a resolution on independent investigation in the Philippines. The last time, during the time of President Duterte, it took us how many years? Oh my God, 3 years to have some sort of resolution, the one that's led by Iceland, for the High Commissioner on Human Rights to conduct a report making, to draft a report, and to submit a report to the Human Rights Council. So I guess there is no excuse anymore, for members of the council not to initiate, an independent investigation. We talked to them last year. We're talking to them here in the Philippines, different diplomatic missions. And what we're saying is that, your holding of an independent investigation should be time bound. I mean, you're putting all these indicators up there, but what you're not looking at is how long this thing has been going on. How long has it been that the domestic mechanisms are not really working, for us to hold officials and government actors accountable, for all these violations. So this year, this coming March, we expect the Philippine government to go into what they call their diplomatic charm offensive. I mean, it's their body language, what they're saying out there is, of course, a lot different than all the curses, uttered by the previous president, when it comes to the UN or to the EU. But that's all. What should I say? Smoke and mirrors. But essentially, what remains is the continuing existence and implementation of policies, both in the drug war and in the conduct of the counterinsurgency program that has made things so much worse up to this day. So any form of we call it cosmetization, of accepted recommendations or words before the UN, saying that everything is perfect already here in the Philippines. The situation is a lot better, etc. When you go to brass tacks, when you go to realities, when you look at the realities, of course, it's not better. And of course, it's a lot worse, especially under the current Marcos II administration. We expect them to play their role, that same role, to dish out all the good things that they want to make the international community believe. It is our role to give an alternative picture, the real picture, and that is where we also rely on you guys, to spread the word consistently, and I guess more feverishly in the coming months. We may not have the independent investigation in the next couple of months, but through our efforts, we hope that it can be made possible within this year or early this year or early next year.
Thank you very much for this very elaborate answer. I see another question from Glennis on what specific efforts can be concerned individuals and organizations in Europe do to counter the terror labeling of activists in the Philippines. Who would like to answer this question?
Claire first.
Well, I think it's pretty much what I tried to convey in my presentation, to make noise as much as we can. Maybe also to rely on programs that we have in Catalonia, in Spain, and other countries that could host human rights defenders, red tagged and terror tagged persons for a few months. We did that 2 years ago here in Catalonia. We hosted a person coming from the Philippines, and it helped her, obviously, but it also helped us to advocate and to be able to show much more what's the reality. So I think these programs, I think we have EU programs also on that, could be a good tool. And then, well, to speak tirelessly about the situation, I would say, in the Philippines, and what is red tagging. I remember in the beginning, people didn't know what red tagging was. We didn't know what red tagging was, what terror tagging was. Today, at least in the human rights and cooperation, international cooperation sector here in Catalonia, we think that we managed to have the word red tagging known, and the definition of it is known. It was enshrined in the resolutions that we managed to have adopted at the Catalan Parliament and at the Spanish Parliament. It's important also maybe to have catchwords, because it's a very specific situation in the Philippines, the red tagging, so it can help also for the medias to be able to rely on several concrete situations and explain also that, as I said, if there is an investigation by the ICC, it's a huge thing. I mean, it's for the worst crimes ever. So the situation in the Philippines, it's surprising that when I hear you, Tinay, when I hear you, Kat, describing the situation, I think, how come people don't know that? How come it's so harsh? It's so hard for us to put the focus, to put the light on the situation in the Philippines, because really it's in many aspects one of the worst situation in the whole world regarding human rights violations, regarding just the judicial system, regarding the human rights defenders, freedom of expression, everything. And if I may say also, the situation during the COVID, it was one of the worst and more strict lockdown. It was for months that the Filipino people could not move. I remember Duterte saying that if people did not respect, that was a terrible sentence. In an official speech, he said to the armed forces, to the police, if someone is not respecting the lockdown, just shoot them. And I'm still surprised that the public opinion don't know. I know it's far geographically, maybe it's far historically, I don't know, but we need to really to put the focus on the gravity of the situation in the Philippines, to try to counter the narrative also of the government. We do it here in this is one of the reasons why we want to start working with the communities here also, because the government of the Philippines is strong. Its narrative is strong through the consulates, through the embassies, through cultural events. So it's also something that we can do very locally to get the Filipino second and third generations maybe have another perspective on what's the situation there. And we think, because our friends here, the Filipino community, tell us that this can have an impact on what's going on in the Philippines, and this can have an impact also on what the local and regional and national authorities know and see about the Philippines.
Victor, if I can respond, in addition to what Claire has mentioned. Well, you have institutions, no, in Europe. Of course, the governments of the various states, the European Commission, the EU Parliament. So I guess these are among the stakeholders, along with several other actors, the broad people's movements and various international NGOs, national and international NGOs are based in Europe. Many of them, including ACP and Viva Salud, have been looking at the situation in the Philippines closely in the past year. So I guess there are pressure points within these institutions. Claire has mentioned the GSP Plus. That is an issue right now. I think it will be reviewed if the EU will renew the GSP Plus agreement with the Philippines. But all indications that we have been looking at would point to the renewal, because you know why? Because it's basically still a trade and investment the trade and investment plus the political considerations of both governments are at play. Yeah. That is why the GSP plus mechanism is now also put under question, no? Because how can it be how can it speak of human rights compliance when the bigger consideration is about trade and investment? How can it be compliant to international human rights standards when trade and investment interests hold a much bigger sway on what should be done by the EU on the situation in the Philippines? At the same time, I think the EU Parliament, there are opportunities with the EU Parliament. We will be meeting them, some of them who will be coming to the Philippines this coming February. We hope that we can further inform them on the updates in relation to the situation. Another resolution may be good, no, to have at the EU. I know there are numerous things on the Parliament's plate right now, but during the past years, we have done so much about it, which includes the efforts of ACP and the Spanish MPs, to have a strong, quite strongly worded resolution last year. What else can be done? The asks are the same, meaning on the killings, on the protection of human rights defenders. Especially EU has guidelines, specific guidelines on human rights defenders. The UK also, the UK government also has the specific guidelines on defenders. I think Ireland, Norway, Sweden have similar guidelines, which means that these are the norms that which can be used by NGOs or groups supporting the Filipino human rights defenders here. Now, hey, it's a way of saying, hey, you have your own guidelines, your government's guidelines on this, how it can support human rights defenders all over the world, and you're not doing it, apparently more strongly here in the Philippines. One thing that we looked at as an initial effort was the request for trial observations in the cases of human rights defenders facing judicial harassment. In our particular case, on the perjury charges that we faced, there were at least 10 diplomatic missions who conducted trial observations during the hearings that were held in our case. So it's essentially they're being there, just their being there in court sent a message, a strong message, to not only to the judge, but also to the former National Security Advisor who filed the case against us, that the international community is looking at how this case will go. Now we can do the same. We can press for trial observations in the cases of many detained human rights defenders and social activists who have been accused of being terrorists, labeled as such. What else? I think a stronger ask needs to be done at the national and international level for the Philippine government to restart efforts regarding the peace talks. Because if the government insists on labeling anyone and everyone, even social movements and revolutionary movements, as terrorist organizations, then how can it go deep into the root causes of the armed conflict? How can there be a peace process that can at least have various actors or social forces in civil war with each other have at least a peace table to talk to each other? to adhere or to uphold previously signed agreements, because we're not starting from nowhere. We have agreements signed by the government and the National Democratic Front of the Philippines on human rights and international humanitarian law. No, but these are being considered as nothing, as simply a paper, by the Philippine government right now. So there's really a need to push for the resumption of the peace talks between the GRP and the NDFP to address not only the issue of terrorist labeling and terrorist designation or implementation of the anti-terror law, but it should go hand in hand with the I think with putting a stop to the government policy of terrorist labeling or red tagging.
Thank you very much for this answer. Kat, you wanted to also answer a question, I see.
Yeah, if I may already answer the two questions about the migration of health workers and the effect of that in on the country. As I have mentioned before, nurses here receive salaries as low as 200 euros per month and go on duty for 12 hours or more, more than the mandated 8 hours. The one nurse is in charge of 40 to 80 patients per shift. That is very far from the recommendation of one nurse per 4 patients in a ward setting. So with these kinds of conditions and the attractive salaries that they are giving abroad, in Germany, in New Zealand, for example, the salaries go as high for a nurse, go as high as times 10 or times 20 of their current salaries in the Philippines. So who would not be attracted to that kind of salary? Aside from the perks that they can already bring their families with them when they go abroad and start their employment. So given this situation, of course, I also have to mention that apart from the economic problems of our healthcare workers, there is also the issue of job security, the contractualization of health workers, the precarious work conditions, and the worst would be the harassment and red tagging of health workers. During the time of President Duterte alone, there were more than 10 doctors who have been killed extrajudicially. One of them was I must mention Dr. Mary Rose Sancelan, who was a public health doctor in the island of Negros. She was among the first rural health physicians who worked there. She came from a poor family and was under the scholarship of the religious until she graduated from medical school. But after so many decades in serving public health in Negros, she was killed after years of being red tagged. Those kinds of situation creates a climate of fear among the medical and nursing community. So apart from the low salaries, it's really the security situation that alarms the medical community and which really pushes them outside of the country. Many of our member doctors and nurses would say, oh, sometimes we can do with the low wages, but with the security problem, we really cannot serve in the countrysides where our services are needed most. So many of them really opt to go abroad. And so the question is, do we support the deployment cap or the limit to the migration of healthcare workers in other countries? The answer is no. Our organization, Council for Health and Development, together with Alliance of Health Workers and the Filipino Nurses United, our call is to resist this deployment cap of the Philippine government. Because the Philippine government would like to, quote unquote, retain our nurses, our doctors here. But the question that we always pose is that why force our healthcare workers to stay when you are not changing the situation that make them live in the first place in terms of salary, job security, and the security situation here, no? So we launched campaigns to resist this deployment cap, setting a limit to nurses who want to go abroad, because we cannot force our healthcare workers to stay here if the government itself is not doing substantial moves to change the situation that make our healthcare workers leave. So I hope that answers the two questions.
Thank you very much, Kat. Tina, I saw you also would like to address a question or not? Oh no, sorry. I thought I saw that you wanted to answer a question in the Q&A section. Anyone else who wants to address one of the questions in the Q&A section?
Perhaps
Victor,
just, sorry.
No, I was just, sorry, tonight. It's not to answer a question, but what Kat just said made me think about the fact that it's true for the health workers, the creation of a climate of fear. It was just to draw a parallel, because I think it shows the absurdity of the red tagging. Red tagging a health worker, how can this person be a threat? It shows that it's really an excuse to silence any contradiction, any voice that could oppose somehow, even if not by talking, but by acting, oppose the government and the government stance and the government rhetoric, no? I was just thinking that it's also true for the lawyers. Many lawyers, many human rights lawyers, of course, are forced to stop working because it's too dangerous. We see how many of them have been killed over the past years. It's just something that came to my mind when I heard Kat talking about this, and just to show those who maybe don't know exactly what red tagging is, the absurdity of it, and the fact that it's a way to discredit publicly someone who's absolutely not opposing or who's not a threat at all, but in order to silence the movement, the peace movement, and beyond. You remember, Tinai, the palm trees, these initiatives during the pandemics, just to go down the street and the corner and to give people things that you don't need in your home, you think that can help other people, and just to, not with money, just to exchange goods and help and try to help during the pandemics. And I can't remember the name of this girl. She was not a member of any association, any political party. She was not doing anything else than helping her own community, neighborhood, though she was red tagged. So it just something that came into my mind hearing you, Kat, talking about the health workers. I think it's true, and it's not casual. It's a strategy of the previous government and this government to try to silence any so-called opposition somehow, and to make people stop doing what they do, and just to have people quiet and to create this climate of fear. Just that.
Communism per se is not illegal, in the Philippines, as they say, because the anti-subversion law has been put aside, no? But of course, there's the anti-terrorism law that replaced it. And what happened after the designations, all of those things, they equate communism with terrorism, and that's the first step that they always do whenever they would try to suppress political dissent. And here we are now. where almost anything and every form of dissent, actually not only dissent, Claire, any form of exercise of freedom of thought, freedom of thought, imagine,
Exactly.
is not only being maligned, no, but the real, the what we call the real world impacts, the real world harm that comes after. That's the more dangerous part of it. No? So that's one thing that we are addressing now in various ways. Of course, it's really a more difficult climate right now because of the extensive military operations in various communities, no? And the chilling effect that the government measures have, imposed on people. The combination of all those things, the impunity in the drug war, the language and the conduct of the counterinsurgency program, the terrorist labeling, all those things are feeding into this bigger and more intense climate of impunity in the country. The thing I remembered before Claire spoke a while ago, there's this upcoming official visit of the Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Expression. No, I believe it will happen this year. So we're also flagging that as an opportunity for us to be able to, illustrate the extent of violations, the landscape of the exercise of freedom, or the non-exercise right now, of freedom of expression here in the Philippines.
Thank you very much. I see most of the questions are answered, and we are already over an hour and a half. So I would propose to end this webinar here. I would like to thank you all very much for attending, and also to our three panelists for speaking and for having such a wonderful webinar, I think, on a very interesting topic. And we're looking forward to more on the topic of human rights in the Philippines. So thank you all very much, and have a pleasant day. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.